Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play set in the Eberron campaign world. It's Friday, and so we have a Khyber Shards Answers, where we take questions from our viewers. And if you've seen the most recent episode, then surprising no one, we are joined by Casey. Same warning as last week. If you haven't watched the most recent episode and you're interested in our campaign at all, stop right now and go watch the most recent episode, because we're going to spoil stuff. And there were some substantial reveals in terms of character background and secrets. Yeah, they were big. So let's just jump right into some questions. We got a bunch about all of this. So starting with a question we had on our on the YouTube video from Caleb Earl. Here's a question for KSA for each of the players. Is your character religious at all? Is Shade religious at all?
I think she's religious in the sense of she has absolutely a devout faith in the Forest Queen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that she would use the term worship, but that's definitely the way that she behaves towards the Forest Queen. Is she wants to fulfill the Forest Queen's purpose. She's confident that she has been protected by the Forest Queen and that she has a purpose given to her from the Forest Queen. And so she definitely has a devoted faith to her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. And then Caleb asked what you, Casey, the players, thoughts are on Eberron's somewhat different view on religion from your traditional fantasy setting.
I am going to be very disappointing in that I am fairly ignorant of that difference
Mm-hmm.
between how Eberron treats religion versus other worlds. And so I couldn't answer that well. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, the main distinction is, while most fantasy settings have a pantheon of gods that are kind of like the Greek or Norse gods, occasionally you might meet one walking around. Eberron doesn't. Eberron's gods require faith. They're not. If they ever were, they're no longer walking around. We're not going to encounter them. They're distant, I suppose, in a sense, or at least only present in a spiritual sense. It's a lot more like real world religion. It's not. You don't believe in a deity because you met them on the road one day. You believe in a deity because you have faith in them and you sense their presence in their life, much the way that Shade does with the Forest Queen. Shade, to her knowledge, has never met the Forest Queen, but would never for a moment doubt that the Forest Queen is there and has played a role in her life.
Right.
Right.
Okay, that is interesting, because our previous long campaign, I had a very, very religious character,
Mm-hmm.
and she had met her goddess on several occasions. Okay, I find that really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in a world that's so filled with magic and impossibilities. I think that even pushes the question of where does that come from a little bit more so.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have lots of options of what to put your faith in or not. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's one of the fun little twists of Eberron. Emily, and we should give Emily credit here. A number of episodes ago,
Well done.
Emily correctly guessed Shade's character secret, that Shade is an actual changeling in the fairy tale sense, and that Shade is a kitsune. And Emily very correctly guessed that. So well done, Emily, at guessing the player's secret. So, and Emily has a few questions.
It was so hard.
Oh, it was.
Not
yes.
Comment on that when she did it. It was so hard not to be like, yes, well done, ma'am. So this is that opportunity. Yes, you absolutely nailed it.
Emily asks some questions that she's been asking each of the players. Aside from Eberron, have you played in any other published D&D settings, 5th edition or otherwise, and which ones?
Well, I've only done one really long campaign previously. We played, gosh, was that a 2-year campaign?
Oh no, it was longer
Is
than
that how
that. It
long?
was more like it was
Okay,
at
that's
least
what I
3
thought.
because we took breaks because me and RA
Okay,
were swapping back and forth, so it was probably more like 3 or 4 years.
right. And so that's the one I have the most experience in, but that was Galarian,
Mm-hmm.
and full honesty, totally had to ask Philip this before we recorded. I did not remember the name of the world, but
That's
Galarian,
okay.
and that was a Pathfinder setting, not a D&D one.
Mm-hmm.
We've played several other, just I don't even know if they were one shots. We've played in a couple of other places, but I don't know what those settings are or if they were in any way traditional D&D settings.
We played through. We played through the starter kit with my daughter, and that's. I mean, it's not very important that it's in that setting, but it's technically in the Forgotten Realms. And a friend of ours ran us through a bit of Ghost of Saltmarsh, which is also a Forgotten Realms setting. And you played in Middle Earth, not for D&D, but you've played in Middle Earth with the One Ring quite a
I
lot.
have played a lot in Middle Earth.
And then you and I played together in the last Parsec setting for Savage Worlds, which RA ran.
Yes, RA ran that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I
And
mean,
that was a lot of fun.
obviously your answers are mostly the same as RA's because you guys play games
I
together.
know. We do play games together a lot.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but for those of you who don't know, RA and I got into this together. And Philip is the one who introduced us to D&D. We knew of it and were interested in wanting to play, but had zero experience. And so we are very spoiled that he is our introduction into D&D and continues to be our DM often.
And I'm very happy
So
to have
I
you as
am,
players.
as evident by my answers, I am pretty ignorant of traditional D&D
Yeah, it's
things, settings, rules.
I am a weird introduction because my D&D start was in Eberron, and so I think of Eberron's whole thing of no alignment tied to species and a very integrated multicultural reality and kind of a tech world, and like all of those things are kind of the things that I think fondly of with my initial experience in D&D. And so it kind of ends up in most of the D&D that I run. Even in Galarian, we've had our Galarian's got elemental airships in it and guns and all sorts of things. So I have a tendency to bring a little bit of Eberron into whatever setting I'm running in. So
And I have no idea what you've added versus
right.
what is normally there. It's
Right.
it's Philip's
Which
world
is,
and we're just playing in it.
I was going to say, which is exactly how I like it. Emily also asks, are there any particular moments from the Lost episode that you're sad about no longer existing on the recorded show?
Yes. Yes. There was a conversation that Shade had with Thora in and please forgive me, we've recorded several episodes since then, so if my summary is off, I guess nobody will know.
Right, yeah.
There's nothing to compare it against. All right, I am right completely in my recollection of what is missing. There was a conversation between Thora and Shade was explaining that we were going to go back to the Feywild and sort of seeking Thora's blessing on that. And so character wise, I missed that this moment got lost because Thora did not give her blessing. We absolutely see that in Fallout later. Or not. I don't remember where we are. Oh my goodness. Okay.
No, you're fine.
Okay. And she makes a comment about she's going to stay here because she has responsibilities. And Shade, who, either trusts you or don't. And those are the only two options is I trust you completely and very much care about your opinion, or I don't, and I would kill you in your sleep. And Thora is in the trust category. And Shade doesn't give in to that. She acknowledged that she understood the responsibilities here at the school, but she also had her own path and her own responsibilities to continue on. And so that just that little bit of self-confidence and strength to disappoint someone in authority that she respects and to still go along with the thing that she thought she needed to do. I thought was a good character moment. And then the other part of that I just missed because it was funny was Shade in her true Shade way trying to explain to Thora what to do if River ended up going, blue and tentacly and trying to explain that she had tea that you could just give this girl if she completely lost her mind. And her many suggestions of how one might do that was just a funny little bit that I'm a little sad it was gone.
Yeah. And then we've kind of given this away because we praised Emily for her early call, but Emily asks, was Shade being a Kitsune planned, or were you as surprised as Shade on not actually being a shifter?
It was not a surprise. It was planned from before we started recording. Philip asked us to look at, and you've referenced this before, so I don't think I'm breaking any confidences here, but
nope.
Asked us to pick a secret before we started recording, and I chose True Changeling. Being from another world, fun secrets to find out. Love that. And so that was the secret I went with. And Philip presented a lot of different options of what that could look like in playing it out. And I mean, if you could play a Kitsune, why wouldn't you play one?
Yeah.
That's one
that I was gonna say, you and Eric, I talked through pretty thoroughly the secrets, whereas RA and Colin picked very, very basic things. RA didn't exactly really pick his. I ended up, because he just didn't really gel with any of them. And then Colin picked a secret, but then just said he didn't want any input in how it played out. He just wanted me to go with it. So it was fun to be able to plan it out with you and Eric. And you and I have very similar likes in fantasy. And so it's very easy for me to sort of guess what you're going to enjoy when I look at these options that I've got. So yeah, being a fox person was not a difficult sell.
You do an excellent job with that. Hey, this are some possibilities. What do you think? Yes, all of them. Mine.
So yeah, the Kitsune thing was, and then the rest of it with Shateria Stellae and the Sphinx and all of this, that was me fleshing it out, and not telling Casey ahead of time. So the nightmares and all of that came in through what I schemed up. Gradually over time, the initial nightmare was, I knew I wanted you to start having nightmares, but I didn't actually really know where we were going with that when I first introduced them.
Got it.
And then I thought, someone will talk to her. And then I found just entirely randomly this really cool art of a snow leopard sphinx. I was like, oh, well, that's obviously who's talking to Shade. Why is there a sphinx? And so it was a very gradual, organic process of I figured out the next part and then had to find a justification for it, and then figured out the next part and found a justification for it, and figured out the next part and found a justification for it, one piece at a time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was
Snow leopard
and honestly,
I mean,
yeah,
she's awesome.
right. No, and I'm really like, I don't obviously the art I came across was by a wonderful and talented artist, and I don't own any rights to it, or which is obviously why I've never put it up on the screen, because it's gorgeous, but sorry. If you're on a Discord, I think I showed it off some when I found it, just pointing links to it, but obviously not on the video. So I made the title card as close as I could get to that art image using the limited tools of HeroForge, which will not actually let you make a Sphinx yet. Can't imagine why they didn't think there would be demand for that.
Both of my long-running campaigns, have I met a Sphinx?
That's true.
And have they played a significant role?
That is true. Our Galarian campaign
for
was
me,
very Egyptian.
100% of the time.
No, that's really true. Then we had some questions from Laura. Laura wanted to know about shifter maturity. Since shifters mature faster than humans, Shade is even more removed from human. How old would she appear in human years when she was found in the Elden Reaches at 3? She appeared 3. Like that's what the druids obviously guessed, because Shade was a toddler, and so Shade was not at the time competent to give an account of herself. Which brings up the interesting fact.
Which, yeah. Laura, brings up a good question. Yeah, Shade doesn't actually have any idea how old she is.
Right.
That had not occurred to me before, but as she pointed out, that I know how many years have passed, and Shade knows that she was told she was 3 when she was found.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is an interesting question. And obviously she was young. She was very young when she was found. So, a kit, obviously.
Shade's gonna start compiling questions for Hirazi when she's just okay. What about this? What about this? Ongoing to ask questions.
It's gonna pop in, ask her a bunch of questions like Ezri does the bust, and then okay, that's all for now. I'm good.
Oh no. She won't treat a Sphinx like he does the bust.
I know.
That would be rude and disrespectful.
That's true. It's interesting because Shade is not social, no. But she does have a very strong recognition of authority when she decides that it's real authority. Like if Shade decides she doesn't acknowledge that you're authority, then you mean nothing. But if Shade decides you have authority, then she's very, very not submissive, but respectful of that. That's interesting. Is that deliberate, or is that just it's sort of the way she's turned into as you played her?
It's deliberate in the sense of she was very much inspired. Sorry, I'll get this out eventually. Shade is very much inspired by our old cat that we had to put down a couple of months ago. Her name was Kilala, and we found Kilala very, very young. We had her since she was 6 weeks. And we actually got her before we were married, and she was a little bit feral. So she was so sweet and kind if she loved you.
Mm.
But if you were a stranger, if you were not approved, she was pretty vicious towards. Um, and Shade, a lot of the decisions that I have tried to make for her are very much based on Kilala's attitude. And so in that, if Kilala liked you, you got the purrs, you got the cuddles. Um, she loved you. She could also turn on you on a dime, even even if you were one of her approved people. Which is I've tried to play a little bit, throwing out that ferocity of Shade every now and
Mm-hmm.
then. And so I have I have ended up playing it, and I don't think that part was deliberate, but I have ended up playing that a lot in authority. If she respects you, devoted attention, absolutely hanging on every word, she cares. But like you said, if she doesn't, then you don't matter.
Yeah. That's very cool. Laura had questions for me, which Casey is going to ask.
Yes. All right. You said that the Death Guard had character classes. What were they?
So there were two different stat blocks. There was the elf, who had a name that you will never learn now, unless you learn to read his armor, because I said that all the owners' names were on it.
All right, good to know.
And then there were Undying Soldiers, which are just the basic soldiers that were there. So the Undying Soldiers were just their stat block. They're a stat block from the Eberron book. The elf paladin, it was a paladin. I ended up building him as a vengeance paladin. I went back and forth on him being a vengeance paladin and him being a blood hunter, because the blood hunter is a cool class, and blood hunter has a subclass that's very, very, that the lore behind it is it's the oldest blood hunter tradition, and it's all about hunting undead, and that really fits with what the Death Guard do. And I'm not 100% sure. I don't wish that I built him as a blood hunter. Probably if we encounter another one, I'll build them out as a blood hunter and see which one I like using. The paladin had some useful things for a monster stat block. The vengeance paladin especially has some mobility options, can teleport a little bit, has some resistances that are really, really helpful, including being immune to fear. So the usefulness of some of the abilities for making up for the imbalance in action economy that you get when you're trying to build a monster that can be a threat to 4 players, was the reason that I ended up going with the paladin build. If I was building a Death Guard character, I would almost certainly go with a blood hunter, because it just has a very good feel for the style of character that I imagine the Death Guard to be like. So it was the Death Guard elf was a paladin, and then the others were just monster stat blocks.
Very cool. Their next question, I realize there's a high likelihood this will get a we'll find out answer, but I just want to know about the world Harazi is from. Her story sounds so interesting, and I need more. I'm with you, Laura. 100%.
So to a degree, yes. Well, maybe we'll find out. I'm not actually entirely in control of that. But I mean, I guess Harazi could just appear and declaim lore, but but I can't answer that to a certain degree. So Harazi's story was inspired, and the reason that I kind of started to think I wanted a Sphinx in the game, and I had actually a couple different ways of playing with this, is a number of months back, Keith Baker wrote a blog post on his website about Sphinxes in Eberron, because there's not, all the iconic creatures of Eberron have a clear place in Eberron, but there's only one Sphinx mentioned in any of the lore, and it's a professor at the main university in Sharn, which is awesome. Like Sphinx professor, let's go play Hogwarts at Morgrave University and have Professor Flamewind.
That is very cool.
But he spent some time musing on different ways you could have Sphinx in the game, based on the Sphinx stat block. And the most distinctive thing about the Sphinx is it has lair actions, and in the Sphinx's lair, it can move time. Like within the Sphinx's lair, it can force players to re-roll by essentially rolling time back slightly. It can actually move itself and the players and the lair through time in different directions by matters of years, and can then return itself. So a Sphinx can theoretically abandon players several years in the past or future if you want to go that direction. And it can also do some plane shifting in its lair. So a Sphinx is a fairly powerful monster by itself, but in its lair, it's insane. Like the power is just crazy. And so that's what is usually very interesting about Eberron, is you take a monster, you look at what it does, and say, okay, how does this fit into Eberron? And the answer within the books is, I don't know. We've got a weird Sphinx in Sharn. And so on that, he proposed a few different ways that you could interpret the Sphinx. One of them was that Sphinxes are fae. They're incarnations of story. One was to have Sphinxes be celestial. They're somehow connected to the upper planes of existence. And the third one, and the one that I went with, is that the Sphinxes did once have a thriving civilization. I mean, they're intelligence creatures, so obviously they would have a civilization somewhere. They did. It's just not alive anymore. It was destroyed millions and millions of years ago. And all the Sphinxes you could ever meet are time travelers. And that, yes, that. So
that's fantastic.
So I read that and knew I must have time traveling Sphinxes. I don't know how yet, but I must have time traveling Sphinxes. And eventually, somewhere in the process of, I've introduced this new wrinkle into the dream that Shade is having. What does that mean? At some point, that became a time traveling Sphinx. I don't remember exactly where in the process of working it out, but at some point it became a time traveling Sphinx. So if you want to see where I got the idea, go search on Keith Baker's blog for his article on Sphinxes, and you'll see kind of the thing that got my mind working in the direction that where we ended up with Hirazi. And then I tied Hirazi into some things that were already existing in our world. The last thing, genuinely the thing I figured out while we were playing, is, why is she here? Like, why is she in Shaytirias Talai? Because she's not a fae. Because, like, I was going along with this idea of, like, oh, she's, the ruler of the little forest creatures. She's kind of a forest creature, so all the Kitsune, they're like her people. But the Kitsune are fae, like in D&D terms. Obviously, they have their own folklore thing in Japanese mythology, but in D&D terms, Kitsune have always tended to be fae. And Shade is so attached to the Feywild that for Shade to find out that she's got no genuine attachment to the Feywild didn't work. And we'd already tied things into Shaytirias Talai, which is a Fey city. And so I realized all those things while we were playing that session out of, oh my gosh, why is she here? What is the reason that how did she get here? Like, I knew where she started, I knew she was here, but I hadn't worked out why she got here. And so I landed on, well, when she first jumped forward in time, she got here and sought refuge among the Fae that lived here, and that's how she gets attached to the Kitsune, and that's, yeah. So that was somewhat last minute. It was just I realized there was a big hole in my narrative of Hirazi, of her motive for being here and her motive for helping the Kitsune and the other forest folk. So
that is almost always the question I have.
Mm-hmm.
I always am so curious about, like, what did you know going into that session, and
mm-hmm.
what have you had planned out, and this was intended, and what was just absolutely Oh yeah, I made that up on the spot. Because I've said this before, but you play that off so well, so I had no idea that that evolution of the dream to the dream plus the Sphinx to the Sphinx, mid game, you have created her backstory.
Yeah. It is very often like that. A lot of the, like I said last week with RA, the whole sequence with RA and Erondis was, the only thing in my notebook was Esri meets Erondis in death. And so I'm there. Okay. What does she say? What does she look like? Why is she here? And some of that I managed to get out of that scene without having to figure out, and figured out later when I had time. And that's a lot of my deeming process. Is we get to a spot, I muddle my way through it, and then I go back later and say, okay, now I will justify what I have just done. This was cool story. Why does it make sense?
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And good to know that it's not just players that do that.
Oh, no, definitely not. And I like that. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago when I was doing a solo episode. I like that because I have found that when I plan less, I end up with a lot more of the story being developed by the way the players react to the world. Tommel didn't exist until you guys made him up. And he wasn't important until you guys decided that he was really important to you. So the I have really liked the times when I've done that. It's always worked out really well for my campaigns. Well, it's mostly always worked out really well for my campaigns. I'm sure I could come up with some place where it fell apart on me, but yeah. So yes, a lot of that was thrown together as we're going. And so there's a degree to which, if I wanted to, I couldn't answer your question because I haven't needed to know a lot of details about Harazi's life yet. I have had a lot of time to think about it because as the dream was evolving over several months, and I anticipated us getting here slightly earlier. But so I've had some of it prepared for a while, and I've had some time to think about it.
What happened? I said a lot has happened.
A lot has happened. And then, of course, this whole arc turned into a crazy, let's do all the personal stories at once thing just through, scheduling mix-ups and dice rolls. Like this, in my mind, we were going to go into the Heart Tree story. We'll meet River, then we'll go into Shaytiri Estelai. We'll meet the Sphinx. We'll come back, and the next thing will happen. And then Eric was out.
Linear there, Philip.
Yeah, Eric was out. So, we're in the Feywild. Obviously, Eric got snatched by the Forgotten Prince. That's fine. Tack that on. And then, of course, Esri gets murdered because we draw the ire of the Death Guard, and so it just it's been delightful. I think it's been great D&D, but it was a lot of trying to wind these things into each other that I didn't necessarily expect to be quite so wound into each other as they have ended up. So
we should go to the Fae more often.
Right. Fabulous things happen when we go to the Fae. Right. Developing the Sphinx. Last thing. The one thing that I also didn't develop, and this is where I'll figure it out. I'll know in the moment. Hasn't always worked. I didn't know what she sounded like. When I started talking as her, I didn't know what she sounded like, and what came out was very generic. And I wish I had put a little more forethought into how she was going to sound. And so that's like, sometimes it works really well. Puzzle Dust, the voice just came out and it's delightful, but it
is fantastic.
Was not as distinctive. It wasn't not that the voice was unpleasant or anything. It just it wasn't distinctly her. So, a question from Nathan Stiller over on our Discord. How has Shade's time in the Feywild changed her understanding of herself, her mark, the Forest Queen, and the world, to the degree that you know yet?
Oh, great question. That is, Shade is actively trying to figure that out. She doesn't know what it means to be Fey and what that alters about her, and if it alters anything, and does that change the way she views herself. I think it draws her closer to the Forest Queen. I think that it cements in her mind the clear connection that she has identified and felt, and for essentially, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, but for Shade to be essentially from her realm, just, oh, of course, this is why we have such a strong connection, and of course this is why she's protected me throughout the forest.
Yeah.
But in terms of sorry, I'm looking back at that question real quick to see what my vague musings have covered and not. Sorry about that.
No.
She is overwhelmed. She is overwhelmed because she doesn't know what this means for her. I mean, she still hasn't processed the Ari or Esri situation, which
stuff seems to always dogpile you guys. Like,
yeah,
the map job was just a little thing, and then it turned into absolute madness.
Right. Right.
Everything just seems to pile on. When you guys get it, it's big.
And she's often in the center of like feeling conversations, but she is not good or experienced in processing her own feelings. And so there's just, yeah, your question is great, Nathan, because it's absolutely, I think, what we'll see Shade try to figure out as we move forward.
Yeah. Well, cool. Those are all of our questions for today. Thank you all so much for these great questions.
Yes, thank you.
I realize the last couple of episodes have been big and so have inspired lots of questions, but we've gotten just such great questions the last couple of episodes that have made it very, very fun to sort of process through the craziness that happened for us a few weeks ago, but getting to relive them as the episodes come out is a lot of fun. So thank you all so much. If you'd like to submit questions for Khyber Shards answers or get in touch with us, you can do so on our Discord, which the link is down below, along with all of our other social media, or in comments on our YouTube videos. While you're down there, hit some of those engagement buttons. We really do. It's we really enjoy reading all of the comments and replying to them when we can. It's really delightful to see. I mean, it's still weird to me that anyone is watching. Like,
I know.
It's so not in a bad way in any way, but it's so strange to imagine that someone sits down on a regular basis and watches us play make-believe together. It's delightful.
And then asks us questions about it.
Right. Oh, man.
It is fantastic. Awesome. Thank you all so much.
Yes. Thank you all very much. New episodes of Khyber Shards drop every Monday. New Khyber Shards answers every Friday. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.